showed us was a little video of how colds and flus were spread, and they had everybody coated in fluorescein and had a fluorescein camera where you see the fluorescents light up, and they had people sitting around playing cards, and within about 30 minutes, people had the fluorescein everywhere because it spread so easily. So I'm going to try to keep my cold to myself. So.
Senator, this is something historic here, and Matt Keelan's house, we were preaching that, but Senator, this is the first time in probably, none of us can ever remember a gathering like this. Center right, center left men of the cloth getting together to talk to a presidential candidate. So we are grateful, we are honored. I know I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. Why don't we start with some introductions on the inside out, and then we've got an agenda, we can run through our agenda. So Bishop, introduce yourself, just the church, and we go right on.
Okay, Bishop Harry Jackson from Hope Christian Church and International Community of Evangelical Churches. Good to see you again.
Larry Palmer from Israel Life Ministries in Waldorf, Maryland.
Harold Hamlin from Emerging Technology Consortium.
Leonard Smith from Mount Zion Baptist Church in Arlington, Virginia.
Martin Brown, Frederick Douglass Foundation, Richmond, Virginia.
Pastor Jamal Bryant, Baltimore, Maryland.
Bishop Angel Nunez, Bilingual Christian Church and President of the Multicultural Prayer Movement.
Pastor Dave Barlett, Hope Christian Church from Bishop Jackson.
Dr. David Anderson, Senior Pastor of Bridgeway Community Church in Columbia, Maryland.
Eugene Craig, MD2P.
Tony Benny with Bridgeway Community Church as well.
Alice Olstein, invited by the Empowerment Temple.
Colin Scrosby, Israel Life Ministries.
Pastor Bill Malone, Life Empowerment Ministries, Fredericksburg.
Bishop John Reed, Victory Family Outreach Ministries in Woodbridge, Virginia.
Reverend Dean Nelson, Chairman, Frederick Douglass Foundation.
Dante King, Pastor of William Mount Zion, Calvert County, Maryland.
Gary Swanson, President, Citizen.
Ricardo Button with Hope Christian Church in Bishop Jackson.
Derek McCoy with QATC.
Well, gentlemen, thank you all again. It's truly an honor, and I'm very humble, and it's a historic moment. So this has probably never happened, at least in my lifetime. So it's a moment of awe. You all know his senator. You all know his record. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to promote that, but I will say, and I've said this in Detroit, I've said it in Chicago, I've said it in all over the country in Atlanta. You know, I've been around this town for 20 years, and my short time here, I've been very, very blessed and fortunate to meet a lot of people. And one thing I've noticed is that, you know, this is America. We're a wealthy country. It's the greatest nation on the face of the earth. We have a lot of hope, a lot of opportunity, and you can hire really, really smart people to dress you up and make you look really nice. You can hire really, really smart people to write good policy. You can hire really, really smart people that can communicate that policy for you. And it'll take you so far. But I decided to take some time away from my family and to take some time away from my business to support the senator's presidential campaign. Because one thing I know, and you all would agree with me, you cannot hire goodness. You can't buy goodness. And this is a good brother here. It's a good man. I've been hanging out with him for the last year and a half, and my family spent some time with him. And actually, when he's in church on Sundays, he sits probably 2 rows in front of me in the pews. So, but this is a good man here. You know, none of us are perfect. But again, I've given up time away from my family and my 2 kids and my business to support him because I think he's the right man to lead our nation. And that's how I'm going to introduce him. And you all know me, and he's a good man. So, Senator, what we would like to do is we have 3 presentations to keep our meeting focused because it is serious. So we're going to start off with Pastor Jamal.
Yes.
He's going to talk about criminal justice, and we're going to go with Bishop. He's going to talk a little bit about, I think you're doing economic development.
Yes.
And then Pastor Dean wanted to focus a little bit on religious liberties to give you a sense of what the group as a whole has been talking about, and then maybe have you respond. And then afterwards, we're going to do a little press for a few folks or something. So I'm going to turn it over to Brother Jamal. He's another Morehouse man over there.
I'll take it. Thank you. Senator, thank you for your time, first and foremost, and not even the time just for this meeting, but the time that you have dedicated to criminal justice, not in the election cycle, but have been consistent, have been, Adam Clayton Powell was considered the lion in the lobby. So I want to thank you for really raising your voice for the concerns of our people with no strings attached. Yesterday, we had the privilege of meeting with Senator Bernie's, thank you, Senator Bernie, and amongst those who met with us was Leslie Baskerville. And she said, I understand you're meeting with the senator tomorrow, and thank him for me for fighting for HBCUs. So I wanted to, I know that's not on our agenda, Elroy, but I wanted to thank you as both Elroy and I are products of HBCUs for standing in the gap. But I wanted to raise in this room and in this forum really the high alarm for criminal justice within our community. And I think a lot of people are disconnected for the angst and the anger that is connected to our young people who are protesting because Senator Jackson, Bishop Jackson, you would consider if the average protester is between 16 and 22, you have to consider they've not seen a judicial victory in their lifetime. That if they're 16 now, when they were 13, Trayvon Martin was killed. And George Zimmerman is now selling finger paints on eBay. When they were 15, they watched Eric Gardner get killed on video with 5 police officers overseeing it, and nobody spend the night in jail. To go 3 months after that to see Tamir Rice described as an adult at 12 years of age, and still a year later, no justice. Chicago is really one match away from a tinderbox of an explosion of a race war in America, and we're not sure if there'll be any arrests. I'm from Baltimore, and all of us are holding our breath and hyperventilating at the same time to see if 1 out of the 5 will find out orange is the new black. And so I'm really trying to figure out what do we do with the over-militarization of the police in our communities. In no other community, Latino included, would rubber bullets be pulled out or tanks pulled out or in mass plastic handcuffs. So what do we do to give full redress, because it's not a Ferguson issue or a Baltimore issue or a Sanford issue, it is now an American issue. How do we give some redress to nationally give our young people in the next generation some hope to know that there are 2 sides of the law, and not just black people are accountable, but blue people are accountable as well?
Well, I've spent the last year traveling and often speaking to predominantly white audiences and telling them they need to understand why people are upset and why these protests are occurring. And I tell the story of Khalif Browder, you know, the boy that was accused of a crime at 16 and put into Rikers Island for 3 years, 2 years in solitary confinement, and then ended up committing suicide, tried repeatedly. And I try to impress upon my audiences that, look, I didn't grow up poor. I didn't grow up feeling like the law was unfair to me. But the people who are unhappy, if they're Khalif Browder's friends or they're his parents' friends, you can see why they think the system's rigged and it isn't working. I also read, you know, Michelle Alexander's book on mass incarceration, The New Jim Crow, and I had always thought the war on drugs had gone far, but I really hadn't thought too much about the racial implications of it. But as I read that and saw that, you know what, it does make sense. Rich kids are getting off and poor kids are not, and there are more poor kids that are African American, and so our jails now are full of black and brown kids because the system doesn't work. The disparity between crack and powder cocaine, all these things added up. And while I don't agree with the president on much, every time they ask me, I say I do support what he's doing to release some people from prison that have been there 10 and 15 years for nonviolent crime. I think there is an opportunity right now between right and left to come together. There is one bill, it's not as much as I would like, that Grassley's putting forward, and I think there will be a vote maybe in the spring on it. I keep asking, I asked Cornyn this the other day, but what I'm also asking is give us a chance to put people on the spot with some other votes. You know, I have a bill with Cory Booker, and some of that is in there. I have one with Harry Reid to restore federal voting rights, which is in there, not in there. And then I have one on civil asset forfeiture that says you have to be guilty for the government to take your stuff. And so I have a series of other bills I'd like to try to amend. And so my hope is we at least get a vote. You don't always win, but it's funny how people are when they're put on the spot and they actually have to vote one way or another. And then the only other thing I'd mention on criminal justice, in my state I've been working, we have no voting forever if you're a felon. And so I've been trying to fix that within my state. And then actually one more thing I wanted to say on this. Last week, Elroy's brother was with me in CJ in Waterloo, Iowa, and we went to a barber shop. And this guy, you know, has been in business 20 years. He seems like he's doing well. And then when I was about to leave, he said, you know what, but when I was 22, I committed a crime and it's still on my record. And so I told him we'd help him, you know, with the governor and see if there's any chance we can do it. But I think from the perspective of a Republican, if we're the party of family values, we need to be trying to get dads who are not violent out of prison or never put them in prison in the first place and reunite families. And the statistics to me have been amazing that like in Ferguson, for every 100 black women, there are only 60 black men. And we all know where they are. And many of them don't need to be there. Some may need to be there, but I think some of it we've gone too far in the war on drugs, really. But thanks for coming.
No, thank you.
Bishop, we'll jump to back.
Does anybody else want to say anything on that before you want to finish that topic, before we move to another topic?
Let's go
Anybody else have anything else?
then we can come back. Does that work?
Either way.
Yeah.
Yeah, just very brief remarks. This January, we had a meeting, called it the Reconciled Church. We only had by invitation about 200 plus leaders, black, white, brown, Asian, from around the country. The leaders represented about 40 million Christians in terms of their constituencies, held it at the Potter's House. Bishop T.D. Jakes and James Robinson were co-conveners with me. We actually played a video from you at that event that talked about criminal justice reform. So I'll just quickly review what we call the 7 bridges to peace. We felt very strongly, and the supposition was made, that we've got a threefold problem. We've got a problem of class or access. We have generational poverty in some areas, and then race. It's not just a race problem alone that we're facing. The problems in urban America often are not just racial issues, but if you got people locked in what they think is a very short ceiling room, there's no way out, hopelessness, anger comes in, and then if you're black or brown on top of it, creates problems. So the 7 bridges of peace concept is, what are the kind of things we should be working on that will produce some healing of the racial divide? We believe it can be done on our watch. Number 1, prayer and reconciliation events. The church has got to come together. If we're going to be a voice, we got to at least accept the fact there's a problem. Second, education reform. It's easy to know that President Obama is right about early education. Many, many conservatives don't want to put the government in charge of training kids, but black kids who can't read by the 3rd grade or do math well, they mess up and wind up going to prison. And there's a problem there that has to be addressed somehow. Third, civic engagement. The fact that Elroy was talking before you came about the underrepresentation in the Senate and Congress and even among staffers of blacks. But we also aren't represented in a lot of our juries and various other things. Community outreach and service, churches and individuals can touch poor people. 5 would be marriage and family intervention. Everybody knows that if you come from a family that's been torn apart, you are at a disadvantage. That's a long-term problem, though. You can't fix it in this moment, but it has to be worked on by a group like the church. Criminal justice reform was 6, economic development was 7. Let me close my comments in this kind of last minute by saying I think that criminal justice reform is really important, but we also have to create some partnerships with businesses, churches, and even government coming together to create safety in our communities. If a community is safe and the people living there will reinvest in terms of buying houses or they're going to stay in their apartments in the community, then a business may want to come and bring a job. But if you don't have safety and the people aren't going to stay, then why does a business want to come to the area? And if the businesses come, if they don't do some systemic kind of job readiness stuff, meaning give people skills, as opposed to just talking about degrees, there needs to be some kind of way to pragmatically give people an opportunity to get jobs. So there are programs that we're aware of. Bishop Nunez and I have been talking to some people about a thing called Operation Blue Shield, which is working right now in Dallas, Texas, to try to bring safety. Bless you. And I'll close with this. Economics, bringing money, so important. We're going to give you a handout. Give a copy to the Senator. Just talking about some of the money that is going out in research and development, going to universities, money that's going in R&D. A lot of that money, and none of that money significantly, is really going to HBCUs or institutions where some of those kinds of money come back to Black individuals, Black enterprises, or to spur creative, innovative outreach in the Black community. So that's a very quick kind of statement. It covered a lot of ground. Sorry for that. But we hope that you'll lead the way in creating policy.
One of the things you mentioned about safety and getting businesses, it made me think. I was on the south side of Chicago, and Pastor Brooks showed me around across from the O Block housing project, Inglewood. And they just lost a McDonald's. They had a couple of businesses, but they had lost a McDonald's there. And he said, because there was more than one murder in the McDonald's. So it is a problem. I called up McDonald's and asked them if we could, to see if we could get some kind of local ownership of the McDonald's and get it reopened, but they'd already given the building away or something.
Wow.
And but you can see how that's not the ultimate answer. Obviously, a job at McDonald's isn't the end all, but the 15 or 20 or 30 kids that get a job there may not be in a gang, and that may be their first job that leads to their next job. And so we do have to figure out how to do it, and it isn't easy because some of these things are even bigger than government. You mentioned sort of the family and stuff. The family is incredibly important, but I tell people all the time, because everybody wants to talk about marriage and they're all looking at me, I can't make you get married. I can't make my own kids get married. I can't make your kids get married. Nobody can do that, but it doesn't mean it's not a good idea. And it doesn't mean that if we look at poverty, the number one statistic that links to poverty, having kids before you're married. And so I always throw it back. Tell your parishioners it isn't the best thing. Now, I mean, obviously we want to help people once they've already had kids, but we got to try to tell the next generation to wait. I mean, it's across all racial boundaries, but it's a problem, and if we don't try to fix it, that and the violence. But the one thing I wanted to say on economic opportunity is that we've tried, the war on poverty started in the early 1960s, and I kind of jokingly say I think poverty is winning right now, but we've had this war on poverty, and we've tried one way. And what I'm trying to offer up is that maybe there's another way, and then let's talk about and debate which way might work best. What we do now is we send the money to Washington, and then we ask to have it come back. So we want to send some money back to Inglewood. We send $100 grand back, or let's say we send $1 million back to Inglewood. What do we do with it? Who do we give it to create jobs? And what I would say is maybe we ought to think of it a different way. Maybe that there are some businesses in Inglewood. I saw 3 or 4. There was a dry cleaner and a couple other businesses. Maybe we cut their taxes so dramatically that we leave the same amount of money that we would have brought, but we leave it in the tax basis of the companies that are there or companies that will move into that area. And I think make it really dramatic. People have complained on both sides, like with the enterprise zones, they didn't work. I think they frankly weren't bold enough. They didn't offer enough incentive. But let's say I'm on the cusp of, there's a poor area in Chicago and I live over here and I'm the vice president of a bank and I make $80,000 a year. Well, I pay like 20-25% income tax. What if I move over here and you tell me I'll pay 5% income tax for 10 years? Maybe I'll move my family over there, and by doing that, everything sort of, improves by that influx of my salary, as well as maybe, we locate the bank there. And, but you need a dramatic incentive because it's dramatically not a great place to live right now. So you can't just sort of say, oh, we're going to give a little bit of tax credits here and there and nibble around the edges. I think we never did enough. I think some of the failure with enterprise zones was not that the concept's bad, but we didn't do enough of it. And the reason why I'd say it's better than me showing up with $1 million is, who do I give it to? If I give it to John Smith who lives in England, is he any good at business? I don't know. Whereas if John Smith's already started a business and is able to thrive in Englewood, he's one heck of a businessman. because if you can thrive there now, that's a person you want to give a tax break to because that person will grow. So I think you could get some movement in, but more importantly, you try to expand the business that's able to survive already there. And the only other thing I finish on with that is that I think because politics got so polarized and that the African American vote became so Democrat, I think, that, and I truly believe this, I think the Democrats take the black vote for granted and the Republicans don't care at all. Republicans don't show up at all, and all the districts tend to be minority districts, so there's nobody showing up really. And I think in many ways, a lot of the poor enclaves in our cities have been left behind because there really isn't a competition for the vote. And in Louisville, when I go into, we set up the Republican office in the west side of town, which is predominantly African American section of town, and we set it up there. Every time we go there, and I don't even know if any of them will vote for me to show up, but everybody's excited that I'm there. And they'd say, we're glad you are competing for our votes. And the media's like, why are you here, looking for votes? I said, yeah, I won. That's why I'm here. I'm running for office.
Let me make a follow-on comment on that. That's really why I think we're here. And that is that the black vote has to be in play again. You and I talked about this a whole lot.
Yes.
And if you help us with intellectual architecture policies that can challenge not only those running for president, but really challenge the status quo politically. I mean, we have an opportunity right now, because things are so tough, to change this, can I call it the ghettoization of the vote? And if we do that, if you help do that, I think that is a tremendous contribution to our nation.
I know the Senator sure.
We gotta wrap it up soon.
But we've got religious
Why don't you
freedom.
back it up? If we're
Okay.
running late, just back
Sure.
it up 10 minutes, and we'll try to do it in the car.
So, thank you very much, Bishop. So let's come to Brother Nelson over here.
Thank you, sir, because this may be the most important issue for these men that are here, Senator. So I'll start. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated that the church must be reminded it is not the master nor the servant of the state, but rather it's the conscience of the state. And if we do not recapture that prophetic zeal, we become an irrelevant social club without moral and spiritual authority. Over the last decade, and you've seen this in your own home state first and very clearly, I believe that we've seen an erosion of freedom of speech. Because of the culture wars, we have pastors now in urban areas sometimes that are afraid to speak out strongly on certain issues for fear that just because they're trying to work with government, whether it's a community block grant or something, that somehow that they will be ostracized or will be pigeonholed. We have members of our churches that are afraid to speak up about their faith in the workplace because of workplace discrimination against those who are believers in Jesus Christ. You love the First Amendment. I know that. Can you talk to us from your vantage point? Is there a real, clear and present danger as it relates to the erosion of our religious freedoms, particularly speaking out on moral issues? And what are you prepared to do about it?
Yeah, and I think that's where the debate has shifted, beyond, particularly like with marriage, it shifted beyond sort of the government. I think they may have decided where that is, but now it's coming even into the individual church. Can you believe in traditional marriage in your church? And there are many people, and it may sound like a wonky thing, but there are many people who talk about the deductions that people give to your church, the collection plate, that somehow, because it's a deduction, isn't the individual's money, but it's the government's money, and the government is subsidizing your church. And I know that's all words, and I don't agree with any of those words, but if you accept those words, that your deduction for your parishioners is a subsidy, then they say, well, that's the government's money, and so we can control what you say in your church. That to me is, while it's a nuance, is a very important thing that we resist calling a donation to a church a subsidy from the taxpayer. It's not. It's my money. If I give money at church, that's my money. And I'm getting to keep more of my money if the government gives me a deduction for what I give. The reason this is important is, like in Houston recently, there were several ministers who were speaking out against an ordinance that had to do with non-traditional marriage, and the government wanted to subpoena their sermons. And I've said at that point, everybody has their different breaking point. That's my point. If I'm a minister and they want my sermons, handcuff me and take me to jail. There's a time for civil disobedience, I think, and I think that's one of them. But I think also it's sort of like some other issues that maybe it was a mistake to ever think that we should have had the federal government involved in marriage and many of these other things, that maybe we need to recapture it in the church. But I think we do need to preach about it, and we do need to talk about it. And it's the same way that like we can't make our kids get married before they have kids, but we still doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And we shouldn't talk about how important it is, and that if you want to get ahead, try to wait, to have your kids and try to do a lot of these things. But I think there is a danger that people are going to come into the church next. Once they've changed the law, now they're going to come to the church next and say you can't say certain things from the pulpit. And I think there is a real danger to that. But the way they're going to come, and that's the way the Supreme Court ruled on the marriage thing. It's interesting. They didn't actually rule that your state, like Kentucky had a marriage amendment saying traditional marriage. However, the federal court that overturned our constitutional amendment, he said you can have it, but you can't discriminate on benefits. So it all came down to government benefits. In fact, I think even the Supreme Court would say that a state could define marriage between a man and a woman as long as there was no discrimination on benefits, which is why I always kind of advocated something to separate it out and say, look, the government should say you can have a contract. So if people want to have a civil union contract, the government shouldn't discriminate, frankly. I don't agree with that, but government shouldn't discriminate on that. But then there still should be the ability to say what traditional marriage is. But then benefits would be based on contracts, not on the marriage contract. But I think we're beyond that now. But what I'm fearing is that the next thing is to come into the church and tell you what you can believe and what you can say in your church. And I think that's the time to really resist at that point.
Is there anything that you can do at this point to help quell that? What's at the federal level, what's the...
I signed on to Mike Lee's bill that says the government can't discriminate against entities that have traditional marriage. So let's say you have a school and you have a separate dorm for boys and girls, and only people who can stay in the same dorm are married. That's just, I know it sounds crazy. But let's say you have that rule. The bill that I signed on with Mike Lee says that the government can't discriminate and say, oh, we're no longer going to say you can be tax exempt. We're going to take away your tax exempt because you're discriminating. So that kind of thing I have signed on to at the federal level. I don't know exactly anything else right now that I can think of that we're doing. But once again, I think it's also that we don't give up on it just because maybe the government doesn't have the answer. If you believe something's right or wrong, you continue to preach it and talk about it.
We got to run, Senator.
All right. Anybody else before we go? We can delay maybe another minute or two. Yes.
Just have one question. In your opinion, what would you say is the greatest cause of division in the world?
That's a big question. The biggest cause of division in the entire world.
Big question.
I think that when you think about sort of the golden rule, that we do unto others as we'd have them do unto us, I think it's an incredibly potent sort of rule in one sentence. And I guess the greatest maybe problem would be people who don't adhere to the golden rule. And I think there's a Christian narrative there, but it's also that and I think when Martin Luther King was writing from the Birmingham jail and he talked about what is a just law and what is an unjust law, he said an unjust law is a law that you cannot make applicable to everybody. So that a minority or a majority passes on a minority but does not make binding on themselves. So it's a little bit like the golden rule in that if I don't want you to do it to me, it's a bad thing. Same way with the law. If I'm not going to make the law applicable to everybody else, and I'm going to say, oh, this law is different for one group of people than the other, then that's an unjust law. I think there's a lesson there to think about what is good and bad, and if people don't accept that, maybe that is the biggest problem in the world. Yes.
Yeah, Senator, as you mentioned, family is important, and on criminal justice reform, I think there's an opportunity to include family reintegration practices similar to, say, welfare reform. Back in TANF, you tied marriage, you tied family, you tied fatherhood programs to receiving TANF benefits.
Right.
As you're doing criminal justice reform efforts, as guys are coming out, if you're attaching programs that include fatherhood programs and relationship development that strengthens the family, is that something that you would
I'm interested
consider
in that, and the one thing I've asked my staff, and I don't think we've come up with an answer, and I'm interested in anybody who's interested in this, is trying not to punish marriage with welfare. And people talk about the fact that the benefits go down if you get married, so people stay separate because the benefits are higher. The hard part about the problem is when you go to fix it, does it explode the payments to make the payments so large? So I am open to ideas on that. If we could figure, and if anybody knows of a legislative idea that's out there, to try not to have a marriage penalty with regard to welfare, because I think that we don't want to discourage people, the law to discourage people from getting married.
Some of the states are doing it, like Virginia, but in terms of criminal justice reform, you can also attach it to some of the criminal justice reform efforts as well.
Like what?
As guys come out, you require them to participate in marriage classes or in relationship classes. As they come out, one of the stipulations is that they do a parenting class.
Yeah, and I also think that there's, when you, prison's really expensive.
Yeah.
Instead of putting somebody in jail for 10 years for nonviolent crime, if they were 6 months in prison and 6 months doing a job program or something,
Right.
then you'd have that 9 years worth of incarceration. You've saved that money. It could be job retraining, some sort of classes and things like that in fatherhood. But I think the best rehabilitation we could ever do is if we attached work to getting out of prison and had actually people working while, particularly nonviolent people. Rapists and murderers just going to have to do their time. We want them away from us. But nonviolent criminals, if we still insist on incarceration, I think you could have work associated with those programs. And so many of those programs could not even, you might not even have to be in prison. Part of your being out of prison would be that you're actually keeping a job, to encourage work. But I'm open to all that. And if you have specific ideas or legislative proposals, if you'll bring them to my Senate office or talk to Elroy, and he'll get me to think about them.
We'll get around, Senator. Can I ask the one question about heroin addiction is high, and the heroin use is going up in America. We're locking up our young people on drug addictions and drug use, and we're locking them up at a very high rate. Is there anything that you have on the table to help these young kids not get on drugs or help them get off of drugs? Is there something that you have proposed?
Heroin's a horrible scourge, and it's going up in my state also. One bill I've signed on with Ed Markey, the senator from Massachusetts, is to let doctors see more addicts. I think a large percentage of people on heroin, to get them off, they have to give them replacement treatment, either methadone or Suboxone or one of these medicines to replace their addiction. And right now, the federal law says a doctor can only see 100 addicts, and then they're done. There aren't that many doctors who want to see addicts, so why would you limit them to 100 patients? Our bill expands the number, allows nurse practitioners and health professionals who've had training to see addicts, so more people can get treated, not less. Now, that's treating after the fact. I don't know how you prevent people from being addicted. It's sort of like, that's a societal sort of problem. I think, and I said this and people made fun of me for saying this, but I do think that idle hands get in trouble, and I think there's a better biblical passage there, but I think when people are working, they're less likely to be on drugs. It's not the answer to heroin, but I think jobs and having people involved, and I think some people get involved in drugs never have known a job or known how good it is actually to go out and sweat and work for 8 or 10 hours. We may complain about it, but boy, it does fulfill the person to be out working, and I think they're less likely to be on drugs if they're working. But I treat it more as a health problem than an incarceration problem.
One more last thing, Bishop Jackson, you just close us out in prayer for the campaign and the senator and his family and the historic gathering.